What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to be rating some Game Week 1 team selections. First of all, I'm going to go through some of the data to look at who the popular picks are from highly engaged FPL managers, and then we'll take a look at some of the teams themselves. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub's My Team tool. You can get your current team selection rated for free using the links in the description below. Just upload a screenshot, as easy as that. Otherwise, let's get into the video. All right, let's start with some data. So what I have in front of me is the top 10 owned players in the current Twitter template. So about 1,000 of you sent me your FPL squads yesterday, and then Sertout went through and scraped about 165 of those teams to give a good sample of who's popular, basically. If you don't already follow Sertout, make sure you do. I'll leave links in the description below. So Isak is the most popular at 97%. Absolutely ridiculous numbers. We're looking at similar to Haaland last season, 8.5 million too cheap. As long as he's fit and available, he's going to be in most people's teams, and for good reason. The second highest owned player is Barco, 4 million defender for Brighton. For good reason again, because there's a lot of hope that he will stay in that team. There'll be a fairly attacking side, so he's got potential for attacking returns plus clean sheets. I think he's fine, because I don't think there's a huge amount of other 4 million standout defenders. But from the press conference today, which I'll go into in more detail in tomorrow's video, Tariq Lamptey is back on the pitch. Estupinian is as well. They're probably going to make another signing that can play left back too. Barco's minutes long term are not secure. And my only worry is that if he does badly in Game Week 1 and then people see Man United and Arsenal straight after, they might start selling him. And he could be one of the first players to drop to 3.9. And long term, the minutes aren't quite there. But on the flip side, there's plenty of upside if he can keep his place in that team. So that's why he's so highly owned. Haaland continuing to creep up, 73% ownership now on the Twitter template, so higher than Salah at 53%. Eze, 64%. The rumours about him potentially going to Man City won't go away. I will say that there's not really strong links at the moment. It just seems to be speculation. But if they do come in for him, that kind of kills him as an FPL option, because his minutes would go down. He wouldn't be on penalties, and he certainly wouldn't be starting every single game. So we've got to keep an eye out on that. My plan is to go with him unless something more concrete comes out ahead of tomorrow's deadline. Trent, 56%. The most popular goalkeeper is Dean Henderson now at 49%. He was nowhere to be seen last time I did this kind of video. And Nkunku, 49%. You know, nearly every 1 in 2 teams owns Nkunku now. Vardiol, 47%. And Solanke has also shot up after the move to Spurs, 43%. So for goalkeepers specifically, after Dean Henderson at 49%, there's quite a big jump to the next playing keeper, which is David Raya at 18%. Then you got Flecken at 17%, Pickford at 10%, Sells and Areola both at 3%. 4 of the top 10 owned goalkeepers are £4 million backup. So Henderson's the favourite. I think under Glasner we saw improvement. Hopefully that will carry on into this season. The opening fixtures are pretty good. And now we know that Johnson is likely to leave. Henderson is clear number 1. Raya is fine, especially as a long-term option. Arsenal defence is great. Shorter term, they have got some difficult fixtures in the first 5, but I wouldn't put it past them to get at least 1 clean sheet in those 3 away games. And then Flecken is the most popular, 4.5 after Henderson. Again, I think with 4.5s, that's what people want to spend, you know, in that position. There's just not a huge amount of options that are definitely going to play, which is why Flecken, is still quite popular. Pickford's kind of in the middle, where you either go up to a premium for 5.5 or you just spend 4.5. There's nothing wrong with Pickford. Most people just don't have 5 million to spend on that spot. Sells seems to be the number 1 for Nottingham Forest. They got great opening fixtures. I wouldn't be surprised if he does really well, but any mistakes might be punished by the fact they've got Miguel who could come in instead if Nottingham Forest wanted to. So for defenders, I've already spoken about Barco. Trent Alexander-Arnold is the second highest owned at 56%. 7 million to me feels like a pretty good price tag, especially with the opening fixtures that Liverpool have got. And his overall score wasn't great last year, but that's because he only played around 2,000 minutes. Usually it's kind of 2,800 to 3,000. I think when you look at the points per match, Trent was the 3rd best defender last year. So we know he's got the capabilities, he's got the fixtures. It's just about whether he can hit the ground running in that slot team. I think he will start Game Week 1. A lot of people still going for Vardiol at 47%. I spoke with Luke about that on a video the other day. There is a chance he still is attacking, but it's not guaranteed. I think his minutes will be good early on. Long term, who knows? It's a Man City defender, but nothing wrong with him. And you can even bench him Game Week 1 and just play him against Ipswich in Game Week 2. Porro I've spoken about quite a lot. Nailed on. Attacking threat is definitely there. 3 decent enough fixtures in the first 5. but obviously are concerns about Spurs' potential to keep a clean sheet. Harwood Bellis is the second highest owned 4 million defender with 35%, so pretty popular. I think Barco's got the upside, but Harwood Bellis has got the minutes, right? We know he's going to play. I'm just trying to find him here. The one thing I'll say about him, depending on when you need him, will likely determine whether he's in your squad. So game week 2, Forest at home, game week 5, Ipswich at home, and game week 8, Leicester at home. If you need cover in those weeks, he might not be a bad option, but ultimately it's a Southampton defender. We probably shouldn't be expecting a huge amount of clean sheets. There's been a surge for Kwanzaa at Liverpool. People convinced he's going to start the season, which I think is likely in game week 1. It's about whether he can hold on to that place, because Konate, it's not like he's an old player that's going to get phased out. I think he's like 25, 26, something like that, maybe even slightly younger. But Kwanzaa has played all of pre-season and done pretty well. He's now 30%. I think if he's a 5th defender, that's not a problem. 4th defender, there's maybe a slight worry there. But obviously there's potential value too, because it's a Liverpool defender for 4.5. So I understand that. Mikolenko's dropped a bit at 23%. 2 Arsenal defenders, Gabriel and Saliba at 21 and 20% ownership. I still think they're perfectly okay to go with initially. And if you don't want early wildcard, you've got them for the good fixtures in 6 and 7 as well. But I still think keeping a clean sheet against Villa away, Spurs away and City away is going to be tough in the first 5 game weeks. And then Konza at 20%, which overall is a player that's probably a little bit underrated, but he should be nailed on. And Villa long-term have some good fixtures. So if you don't need him straight away, but you want to hold on to him a little bit longer term for the fixtures when they get better, I think he's a good option. He might find his way into my squad as well. So for midfielders, Eze is the highest owned at 64%, as I mentioned. Great option as long as he stays at Crystal Palace. Then it's Salah at 53%. Big decision to be made about him versus Haaland or both in your squad. I'm going to go without him, but it's not because I think he's going to fail to get FPL points. The fixtures that Liverpool have got mean he's likely to do really well. It's just that price tag. I just can't afford to put him in, but he's a great option. Nkunku at 49%. Personally, I don't think he's being overhyped. I think he's just a very good option at 6.5 million as long as he gets minutes. And I think he's too good not to. Smith Rowe at 43%. I like Fulham's early fixtures. He should be pretty much nailed on. But it's worth noting that in the press conference yesterday, Marco Silva said he hasn't played games consistently, so it's going to be a process for him to be in his best physical condition. But we have already seen that he can make an impact. I think he's going to start. I just think that we should probably expect early subs, in the first few game weeks. Saka at 41%, the next highest owned premium after Salah. Great option, both short and long term, in my opinion. Nailed on penalties. Great. Then Jota at 37%, another player that's seen a surge. He started the last pre-season game for Liverpool. Likely to play number 9, I would say, against Ipswich in game week 1. I do think it's a bit up in the air about how long he keeps his place and how many minutes he gets. We might see Slot rotate those attackers during games. And it could be that by game weeks 2, 3, Darwin is starting through the middle instead. We just don't know. But I think for 7.5, I completely understand why people are going for him, because he's got potential to massively outscore that. He's a great finisher and he will get chances in that Liverpool team. Gordon 31%, Winks at 25%, and nailed on 4.5 million midfielder. Not likely to get you a huge amount of attacking returns. Oscar Bob 20%, we now know he's injured. Take him out of your teams. And then Bruno Fernandes at 15%, who's probably a little bit underlooked at, I would say. He's going to play. He's got the penalties. He will go and get you attacking returns. He'll be pretty consistent. But he's maybe not going to blow you away for an 8.5 million price tag. Like, he's not going to go and score like a Salah or something like that. So solid option. But I think if people put him in their teams, they'll look to downgrade him to spend money elsewhere. So I think he's good, just maybe slightly more difficult to fit in at 8.5. Then for forwards, you've got Isak at 97%. Feels like a bargain at 8.5 million for me. Then Haaland at 73%. His ownership is creeping up. For me, I just can't go without him. I want to captain him in game week 2. In game week 1, I'm happy to go for like an Isak or a Saka. I don't need Salah. That's basically the reason I'm going to stick with Haaland. Solanke has seen a surge. He's now the 3rd highest owned forward in the Twitter template, 43%. He should be nailed on for Spurs. I expect him to start game week 1. Is he going to hit 90 minutes every game? Possibly not. They've got other options that can play number 9 as well, especially when Richarlison is back. But it was big money, big signing. I think he'll be straight in the team. He's a really good option for 7.5. Would he keep penalties? Possibly not. We're just not going to know until Spurs get one. João Pedro, 24%. Potential bargain for 5.5 million. I'm a little bit worried, though, that Brighton are signing a lot of players. Like, apparently they're in for Rutter from Leeds. Like they've activated the release clause. Now they have to wait and see if he wants to join. If he joins, he can play as the number 10. That might push João Pedro to the 9, but you've got Welbeck. Ferguson back soon. He's also on the pitch. I'm just not sure about João Pedro's long-term minutes. And you've got Arsenal away in Game Week 3, Everton away in Game Week 1. So the fixtures are not fantastic. I think if he was definitely going to play, he's worth it. But longer term, if he's not, I'm getting a little bit less sure about him. Muniz good at 20%, 6 million price tag is decent. Good opening fixtures, should start ahead of Jimenez. Havertz at 8% is fine, especially early on. I think it's hard to fit him in when you've only got 3 forward spots. Chris Wood 6%, maybe underlooked a little bit given how good Nottingham Forest's first 3 fixtures are, and should start ahead of Awani until he gets up to speed. Watkins 6%. Everyone's saying how essential he was early on. No one owns him now. And then Stewart and Fraser 4.5 million forwards at 3%. I'm sure you won't, but don't forget the Game Week 1 deadline is tomorrow. If you want to get an idea of how your team selection is looking, you can get it rated for free over on Fantasy Football Hub using the links in the description below. They've made it super easy this season to get your rating. All you have to do is upload a screenshot of your FPL team either on the website or on the app like I'm doing right now. So on my phone, I just go to Import Team from Screenshot, click the photo library and choose one of my many drafts, and then click done, and in a matter of seconds it will upload your team. Simple as that. Make sure you check it out. Once you've done that, you simply click save, and then you can even click the optimize button to put the correct players into your squad, and it'll give you a rating. This team comes out at 96%, which is pretty decent. So like I said, getting your rating is completely free. If you want to use other features of the tools such as suggested transfers, there's 50% off at the moment. So you can see on screen for that team I just uploaded, it wants me to sell Gordon for Salah, and Nkunku for Saka, and to fund that, it wants me to do Haaland to Havertz. It just gives you an idea and options if you're a little bit stuck. As always, links in the description below. Check it out today before that Game Week 1 deadline tomorrow. So thanks to Moose on Discord, he was able to tell me what the affordable squad would look like based on the ownership numbers from that sample from Twitter that we took. So this is what the squad is. Henderson in goal, back 3 of Porro, Vardiol and Trent Alexander-Arnold, so quite heavy in defence. Midfield of Eze, Gordon, Jota and Nkunku. So no room for Salah, Saka, Palmer or Son. And then up front it's Haaland, Isak and Solanke. And I think as we get closer to tomorrow's deadline, that front 3 is going to be extremely popular. Like even me with kind of João Pedro in that Solanke spot right now, I'm considering changing it just for that, what I would see as certainty of minutes. And then the bench is Fabianski, Smith Rowe, Harwood Bellis, and then Barco. So it's a pretty decent squad. It comes out on the My Team tool at 95%, and it looks good. I'd be a little bit worried about the defenders on the bench, but the fact you've got Smith Rowe as well does give you some depth, as long as you're confident in his minutes. Okay, it'd be nice to have one of those premium midfielders, but you've got an expensive backline, and you've got Haaland, Isak, and Solanke. Something has to give somewhere. And I know the comments will be that that midfield is lightweight, but it's only missing one premium player. The rest of the squad is so solid. I actually think that looks pretty good. What's interesting is, when the game first came out, people were spending less on defence. The talk was, and I said it as well, there's loads of 4.5 million defenders that are good. The closer we get to the deadline, it doesn't feel like that. And people are putting money back into their defence. So that kind of structure has changed since the game release. But overall, there's not really anything bad I can say about. Obviously, you know, like Jota is potentially a minutes risk long term, but he could be massive upside in the short term. Every other pick there is pretty much nailed on when they're fit, apart from possibly Vardiol, just because eventually Man City will have all their players back. And I guess Nkunku's fitness is a concern, but he's played a lot of minutes in pre-season. So yeah, solid squad. People are very well informed at this point. As you can tell, there's just not much wrong with it at all. So just as a comparison, I've got the affordable squad based on overall ownership to see if there's any similarities. Again, thanks to Moose from Discord for putting this together. I did ask what he wanted to be credited with, and that's what he said. So I guess if you know, you know. The squad rating comes out slightly lower at 93%, but honestly, anything 90 plus, you're probably onto a pretty good thing, I would say. In goal, you've got Raya, rather than a 4.5 million goalkeeper. Again, I think he's a pretty good pick. That's always a position where I try and spend the least amount of money. It's just how I like to play the game. But Ray is not a terrible pick whatsoever. They've still got Porro and Vardiol in the back 3, but instead of Trent, it's Saliba, who's a good pick, but I know he scored in the last friendly, but I think Gabriel's the one with the goal threat out of the 2. And again, the 3 of those first 5 fixtures being Villa, Spurs and Man City away is not ideal. Eze's in, Gordon's in. Then you've got 2 premium midfielders, Palmer and Saka. I think the balance probably is to have 1, and try and fit in either Haaland or Salah instead, because in this squad there's no Haaland or Salah. And it's not that they're bad picks, because of course they're not, but it just shows that people are having to make a decision with those two players, and most people just don't have both. It's quite hard to put together a good squad with them. And then up front you've got Watkins, Isak and Solanke. So basically instead of Haaland it's Watkins. Then because you've got that extra money, Saka and Palmer are able to be in as well. Then it's Turner on the bench. I just wouldn't go with him. I think he's so highly owned that he could drop in price pretty quick. Winks, 4.5 million midfielder, not going to play that often, but sorry, he is going to play, but he's not going to get you attacking returns that often. He can just sit on your bench. And then it's Anderson from Crystal Palace and Barco in. He's pretty much everywhere at this point. So again, I quite like this team. I think the fact that it comes out at 93% shows you that you can get away without having either Haaland or Salah, but personally I just like to have at least one of them. Like, there's other players you can captain. You've got Isak in game week 1, right? You can choose other options in 2, 3, 4, etc. But having that player to fall back on if you're stuck over captaincy, because you know they're more likely to deliver than not, is just so handy in FPL. It just gives you something to not have to worry about. So personally I would put one of those two in. But again, overall a pretty decent squad, and you can already see there's a core of players that are going to be in a lot, right? Porro, one of Vardio or an Arsenal defender, Solanke, Isak, and Kunku's not in this squad, but overall he's going to be quite highly owned. Eze is super popular. So yeah, a few similarities. Overall, again, a decent squad. I prefer the Twitter template, but then I would because I'm part of that community, I guess. And then we've got the FPL Experts Ultimate Team. This was posted by the official FPL Twitter account. It's a group of FPL managers that kind of put this together, that do content for FPL. They sometimes feature on the show and stuff like that. None of them would call themselves experts, but that's what FPL tagged them as. So you've got Henderson in goal, again, super popular, 4.5 now, and probably is one of the best in the short and longer term. I think if you knew that you were going to not wildcard for like 10 to 12 weeks, you could maybe go for Flecken instead, but Henderson's feels like the slightly safer, shorter term pick. Back three again, quite expensive. Saliba, Vardio and Porro. Midfield is Saka, Jota, Eze and Smith Rowe. And up front is Haaland, Isak and Solanke. Once again, we're going to see that front line quite a lot, especially if people get worried about João Pedro. Turner on the bench. Not entirely sure why they've picked him. Like, it might not be an issue, but he's not going to play for Forest, as I've said before. Sales looks to be first choice. Miguel is probably second choice. They probably buy another goalkeeper as well. And Turner's quite highly owned, so he could drop in price. It's not a huge issue, but just pick a lower-owned goalkeeper instead, I would say. Then you've got Barco, Winks and Robinson. It's interesting to see how often Winks is now appearing in these squads. I've not really given him any thought. It might be by the time I get to the deadline that I'm trying to save 0.5 million somewhere and I go for him. But he's not going to get you any attacking returns, and most of the 4.5s are in that position. Obviously, at 5 million, everyone wanted to go for Oscar Bob. He's now injured. I think Rodgers is probably the safest bet. Like, he's not guaranteed to keep his place, but early on, he should play for Villa. And if he does well, hopefully he'll keep getting starts. There's Sinisterra, someone mentioned to me at Bournemouth as well. But again, that's another team where you can't be sure about who's going to get the minutes every week. But there's part of me that just thinks, unless you really need that 0.5, you should probably take the punt on one of the 5 million options, because there is much more upside than there is with someone like Winks. But also, you look at the rest of this 11, and it's decent, right? I mean, you've got to play Smith Rowe every single week, but by doing that, you've got a solid backline. You've got Saka, and you've got Haaland, and you've got Isak, and you've got Solanke. Ultimately, if you wanted someone like Gordon in here or another 6.5, you've got to drop Solanke down to like a Muniz or a João Pedro or an Armstrong at Southampton, who's another 5.5, by the way, like João Pedro, that's going to take penalties, but he's absolutely nailed on. With João Pedro, if Brighton keep signing players, there's issues there. Armstrong should be fine. So that's kind of the sacrifice. But I do think, again, closer we get to tomorrow's deadline, people are going to take money out of positions to get Solanke for that, for the minutes, essentially. Jota, I won't keep saying it. Again, short-term fine, long-term not so sure. Saliba, I think, is a little bit of a boring pick. I'd probably rather go for Gabriel instead. But again, solidity of minutes with Saliba is definitely there. Pretty decent team. Get rid of Turner. Why is he in still? So this team was sent to me on Twitter. It's an aggressive Game Week 4 wildcard strategy, so only building the squad for the first 3 game weeks in mind. You got David Raya in goal and Gabriel in the back 3, so double Arsenal defence. Trent and Kwanzaa also make up the back 3, so double Liverpool defence as well. Salah, Son, Gordon and Kulusevski in midfield. and then Chris Wood, Isak, and Havertz up front. So no Haaland. And then the bench is £4 million goalkeeper, Smith Rowe and Robinson, both from Fulham. Bearing in mind that after Fulham play Man United away in Game Week 1, they got Leicester at home in 2 and Ipswich away in 3. So those fixtures are pretty good. And then Harwood Bellis is the £4 million defender of choice. I think if you're on this strategy, Barco is less important because Brighton have got Everton away, Man United at home, and Arsenal away. It's going to be tricky to get a clean sheet in one of those games. Comes out at 92%, so again, pretty decent. Most of these teams now are put together, are solid. There's not a huge amount of issues with them. The Game Week 4 wildcard is one I've seen spoken about quite a lot. I don't hate it. I think a lot of people are going to have used their wildcard by probably Game Week 6. Like, some people will obviously hold on to it later and stuff might crop up, which means you don't need it. I think a lot of people will use it early. So going for this kind of strategy where you can maximise the points in the first 3 game weeks is pretty sound. Double Arsenal defence, I would definitely do that because you've got Wolves in Game Week 1, Brighton at home in Game Week 3. Yes, it's Villa away in Game Week 2, but looking at this team, playing Raya is not a problem. He could go and get you save points if they don't get a clean sheet, and you can play Robinson against Leicester at home instead of Gabriel, and then bring Gabriel back in for Game Week 3. I'm not convinced whatsoever by Kulusevski as a pick. Like, he's been playing number 9 in pre-season and doing well by all accounts, but they've just signed Solanke. I think most of us expect him to go straight in. Even if he doesn't play in Game Week 1, he'll surely play by Game Week 2. So that means Kulusevski's not going to play number 9. Son's always going to play, so he's on the left. You've got Brennan Johnson on the right, so there's competition there. And a lot of people think that Kulusevski might just play central, like in a number 10 role. But to do that, you've got to get Maddison out of the team. So for me, there is just too many, like, what could happen things with Kulusevski, and he is not guaranteed to start Game Week 1. I know it's Leicester away and Everton at home, which is decent for Spurs. It's just not a pick for me. I'd rather go for a different 6.5. A bit like the 4.5 million defenders, it does feel like 6.5 midfielders have gotten less in terms of the amount of options since pre-season started. But you could even go for someone like Gibbs White, who's much more boring than Kulusevski, but has 3 good fixtures for the same reason that you've got Chris Wood in the team. So maybe consider that instead. Son is fine. I think it's close between him and Saka for the first 3 game weeks. So for Spurs, it's Leicester away, Everton at home, and Newcastle away, 2 away games. For Arsenal, it's Wolves at home, Villa away, Brighton at home. Personally, I think the fixtures in the first 3 for Arsenal are slightly better. I know that Spurs get to play a newly promoted side, but it is away from home, and Arsenal got 2 home games. So personally, I would go for Saka over Son. But again, it's 3 game weeks. Like, anything can happen, right? And if your preference is to go for Son because you know you're going to wildcard and you can change it around, perfectly fine. Just quickly on Arsenal players, because I know you've got Raya, Gabriel, and Havertz, so you'd have to drop one of them. The only problem with Game Week 4 wildcard is when you do it, you're not going to want Arsenal players, or not that many, because they've got the away games against Spurs and Man City in 4 and 5. But in Game Week 6, they've then got Leicester, and I think it's Southampton at home. I'm just going to double check that. Let me have a quick look here. Yeah, Leicester at home and Southampton at home, and then Bournemouth away. So you're probably going to want them back. So Game Week 4 might be tricky to actually build the team, but then it could also just work out really well. So it's nice you don't have Haaland. I think, like, with the way this was sent in, Isak is captain in Game Week 1. So you've got Salah, but you're not going to captain him against Ipswich. I think the first 3 fixtures are quite similar between Liverpool and Man City, but the fact that Haaland gets to play Ipswich at home, I'd be tempted to put him in. And because you're on an aggressive strategy, you can afford to be a little bit less worried about your bench picks to get that money to maybe get Haaland in instead. But not much to fault with this. Like, Kwanzaa could lose his place. It doesn't matter. You're wildcarding early. If he doesn't play, you can just go for Robinson. It's just Kulusevski. He's the only one I don't like, really. And then we've got the FPL Champions team. Hopefully you watched the video with Jonas that I released earlier today. Obviously, I talked through his team with him, but he gave most of the opinion. So I'm going to talk about it now. And as you might expect from someone that plays analytically and won the game last year, it's a really decent opening squad. So Henderson in goal again, really popular 4.5. Kwanzaa is in 2, so he is willing to take a little bit of a risk. And I think that's interesting. He said in the video that the odd risk here or there is something that he likes to do. And there is upside with Kwanzaa as a pick for Liverpool, given their opening fixtures. Trent and Porro are both in. Then you've got Saka, Bob, Eze, and Bruno Fernandes in midfield with Nkunku on the bench. Now, since we recorded that video, we found out that Oscar Bob was injured. That's the beauty of doing FPL content. You put a video out and then a couple of hours later, news like that comes in. But ultimately, it doesn't have to massively change the squad, right? Oscar Bob can come out and you can just put Rodgers in instead. You might not want to play him game week 1. You could go for Nkunku instead, but he's there on the bench later on. Also, by the way, we need to keep an eye on Watkins. I'm pretty sure he's going to start game week 1, but he hasn't had a single minute of pre-season, and Rodgers started the last 2 games at number 9. Now, that's of course not going to be something that happens long term, but in game week 1 against West Ham away, if Watkins is not ready to start and he's going to come off the bench, Rodgers may play as the number 9, and even when Watkins comes in, Rodgers could play behind him or maybe off the left as well. Ramsey is back, so he might provide competition when he's fully fit, and Villa could still sign players, but Rodgers at 5 is probably the one to take the risk on right now. Bruno Fernandes, he said himself, Jonas, that he's just in, I can't remember the exact wording now, but he's basically a solid, steady pick that you just don't have to worry about. I think people are just struggling to find 8.5 million. Like, I'm in that position with my own squad that if I downgrade Gabriel to a 4.5 and I do Smith Rowe to Rodgers, that gives me 2 million to spend. So I could either do Garnacho to Fernandes or João Pedro to Solanke. And I think in that situation, I'd rather have Solanke and a 6.5 than Fernandes and João Pedro, like in this draft, only because I'm getting slightly worried about João Pedro. I think we need to be careful, though, because this happens every season. Once you get closer to game week 1, honestly, you start questioning everything you've ever thought about during pre-season. And all those players you thought, I'm definitely going to have them, they're great options, you start thinking of all the negatives as well. And I think there is reason to be concerned with João Pedro, but he's still very likely to start the season. If he performs, why would he not keep his place? So he is still a good option, but I just wonder if Solanke and a 6.5, could that be a slightly better way to spend the money? On the bench, Valdemar and Nkunku, like I mentioned, Konza and Barco. I like Konza longer term. I think he's a good option. I mean, around Champions League, we don't know how Aston Villa are going to rotate and stuff like that. Like, they might rest a few players in the league, but centre-backs are not usually a massive problem. They haven't signed anyone that makes me think Konza's going to come out of the squad. And in game weeks 3 and 4 and 5, they got Leicester away, Everton at home, and Wolves at home. I think the first Champions League game is between game weeks 4 and 5, so potential worry there. But if he plays, bearing in mind the likes of Arsenal defenders and Porro have got some slightly tougher fixtures in that time, you've got cover on the bench. The only thing with Konza, he just doesn't really offer much attacking threat whatsoever. He's like Fernandes. He's just not an exciting pick, but he has got that cover later on. So really good squad. I hope Jonas does well. It'd be amazing to see someone go back-to-back FPL Champion. I think it's almost impossible, but you never know, right? You could do it. 94% on the Fantasy Football Hub My Team tool rating. And if you want to get your team rated for free, like I said earlier, links in the description below. Give that a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on podcasts, rate 5 stars as well. Otherwise, I'll catch you tomorrow for final thoughts.